Hey guys, what's up? Bitch la. And for the first episode, I'm a little bit confused because I could have sworn that I put it on airplane mode. And then evidently it was not on airplane mode. So we ended up recording with the AirPods instead of the microphone that is in the phone. So I'm not really sure what good that is. What does that accomplish? Because it's the clarity is lower. It sounds like the resolution of the microphone is more poor with the AirPods, although the bass is still surprisingly pretty much there. You don't always expect it to be that way, but I mean, I guess right off the bat, you would think the bass would be the main thing the AirPods wouldn't reach, but I guess for the human voice, even though it is true that it's probably the lower hertz, that a smaller microphone would have a harder time grasping. It's just not as relevant for the human voice unless I had, a particularly deep voice or something, then it may matter more, but fortunately it doesn't. And I don't know, I'm just thinking about for this how I would like to do it moving forward, because it is true that conveniently I have the iPhone where they first upgraded and overhauled the microphones with. So the microphone in this phone isn't bad. It's just that for an outdoor setting, I could invest in a better microphone. But I guess I wonder, how important is it really? I don't know. Maybe I'll see how some of these recordings go and go from there. Because there is an obvious immense convenience to just whipping the phone out and just using it like this with the built-in mic. There's a huge convenience to that. It's very unintrusive. At first, I wanted to do Walk Switch Law as a series, but I never actually ended up doing it. And that was solely due to the fact that I didn't like all the having to carry around the microphone and stuff. It's pretty cumbersome, doesn't fit in a pocket, So I could never really get into it, but this is very seamless for me because there's no attachments. It's just the phone, and I had gotten used to doing it anyway because I would have questions and I would want to transcribe it into GPT to get my questions answered. And then after a while, I realized if I'm going to be talking into my phone, it's kind of silly that I'm just transcribing and I'm not actually saving the recording, because I'm talking in a way that I would want to be recorded. And I'm realizing, it's getting recorded in text, but what good is that, really? There's not really as much interest or greatness in just a text recording as there would be still having access to the original audio and my tone and just the way that I am articulating things. It's a much more potent chronicle of things. And really, I'm still upset that I hadn't been doing something like this for much sooner in my life, because I think there's a lot of eras of my life that are not thoroughly documented. They're not documented properly, you know, and that it's just a shame. I mean, when I think of 2024 and I think back and try to remember, it's very interesting, you know, because I was very into the past and how much better things were as in the past, and I had this whole thing about how back then my motivation for technology was in the hopes that we could create a time machine at some point through, I don't know, the utilization of tech, and by constantly purchasing new computers and other things with faster CPUs and such supporting the industry, we could at least get to a point where maybe we could simulate the past and simulate other time periods, which that will probably be possible, but since there's basically a lot of lost data, right? Because not much has actually been recorded. And so that's kind of the problem, or the issue with that, is there's lots of stores or environments that have not been properly archived. And so I don't know that it's possible to recreate an environment just from the subconscious memory alone. I mean, that would be an interesting thing, wouldn't it? You know, if we could just basically insert a Neuralink into somebody's brain and somehow have a full resolution capture of certain positive memories and live within that. But that's what I think of when I think of 2024. I still was not super future minded, and I definitely was less optimistic about the future. At this point, I'm definitely safely able to say that I'm more optimistic about the future for my sake. I think I will be happier in the future, just given the way I am and the trajectory of things. I'm basically built for the future and thinking about the future and all that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, it's a bit reassuring, I suppose, but I still have my doubts, and it still would have been easier and nicer to be born in the past, and I still agree with that, but it's possible, and I think there was some kind of a timing to my birth that is very intentional and specific. And I'm just hoping for that, because it's really a better belief to have, I think, than just the truth, which is probably that it was just better to be born in the past, you know, and I at least can try to hope that there's some kind of plan or some kind of advantage for me, some kind of hope for the future, you know, and that's really all there is. That's all I really have, or all I can really say for myself at this rate. And it's better than living in a way that is just obsessed with the past, and maybe correctly obsessed with the, because I still think it's accurate. I still think it's extremely accurate that my life would be better if I was born in the past. And that kind of leads me to something I've thought about. I don't know that I've recorded it. I could have. But it's that those past generations, they're the entitled ones. Like it's always said, and we're always told all this stuff about, oh, you guys, especially more so when I was younger, we were told, oh, you guys have no idea how good you have it. And there were those kind of attitudes like, we had it easier, and that things were so much harder in the past. And the truth is, we now are seeing firsthand how dangerously incorrect that thought is, and how the truth is that it was actually the older generations who are the entitled ones. And the reason why is because, sure, maybe my generation and the younger generation were more entitled emotionally, but in terms of actual quality of life, it is the older generations that were far more entitled and had far more access to wealth and opportunity and privilege, even if it meant that they had to drive to McDonald's instead of having DoorDash deliver McDonald's right to their door. At least a larger percentage of them got to actually enjoy the luxury of their time. Whereas my generation, yeah, DoorDash is amazing as a concept, but it's so costly that it's really not a large percentage of people that can actually enjoy the pleasure or the spoilage of it. And in addition, car costs and repairs proportionate to income has skyrocketed. So it's not even as feasible to live in such a leisurely lifestyle of, oh, I'm gonna go eat fast food, right? That's not really something my generation is gonna really have to hunker down and do grocery only. Really, I think that's the future. And it's a pinch that is being given to us by a wealthy class hoarding more and more wealth, and the wider population not being politically active enough to vote against these special interests. So over time, this has obviously become a problem. And that is another reason why I think the older gens, again, have this very comfortable advantage, because the blood is on their hands. These older generations are enjoying the good life of, yes, maybe their lives were marginally more difficult and took marginally more material effort. Maybe they were physically a bit more strenuous than our lives. But see, that's not even us having an advantage, because then my generation is less healthy. So how is it an advantage that my generation doesn't have to deal with these things? Doesn't really make much sense, does it? It's almost like the people themselves are just that stupid, that they can't understand that, yeah, I mean, it may be easier, but having a literally easier life does not actually mean the life is better. And it doesn't mean things are good, and they're not good for us. And I think most people would easily trade a lifestyle that took a slight increase in physical effort, but was overall a much more healthier and prosperous situation. And this kind of leads me to one of my next recent thoughts and frameworks, and it's the immorality of retirement, and how lots of people might still expect retirement or think of it as a norm when it's not, and it never should have been, really. It was only possible for a brief blink or a brief breath in human history was the only time that retirement was actually a feasible experience for humanity. But it's definitely not going to be the case now. Again, largely due to the erosion of systems and the hoarding of wealth, leading to a hyper-growth society, which, you know, arguably has its pros and cons. You could debate about not necessarily taking sides, but that is the truth of it. It's if you have a larger percentage of money in the hands of a few, it's going to create, broadly speaking, living conditions will, broadly speaking, be much lower. And if nobody wants to do anything about it, then, you know, it's basically people's own fault for these conditions. And like I said, the blood is on the hands of the older generations who claim that we have it so much better. But I think it's possible some of them are wising up to the truth. And the truth is that we don't have it better. And all the things that I'm saying are eerily accurate and almost scary, you know, because that generation upon generation improvement has stopped majorly. And we've seen major stagnation within society. We now have tons of technological advancements and improvements, and yet very little to show for it due to lack of an implementation from businesses. You know, businesses are not really forced to improve necessarily, and I think a big reason for that is they get away with cutting corners way too much. An obvious primary point of that is with cutting the wages of their lower waged workers, which you would think a business may use for more productive output, but oftentimes it really isn't. Oftentimes you're just having higher ups getting paid massive salaries that are not equating to tangible innovation or actually good decision making. If that makes any sense, there's a lot of issues with that. And yeah, it's a big problem. You know, a lot of businesses are just operating very suboptimally. And I think that has to do with a lack of rules and mostly a lack of good rules, because obviously bad rules and regulations are not good for business in any way, shape, or form, but good rules and regulations would actually be helpful for the greater economy, even if not always the great, and potentially even the greater humanity, even if on the surface level seeming like more of a nuisance for businesses. The truth is humans do not operate best in freedom, and neither do businesses. They tend to make fairly poor judgment, and there isn't really an incentive to operate optimally, and there's more of an incentive to do lazy workarounds. Like I said, cutting benefits, cutting the wages of lower workers, instead of actually figuring out a way to operate more efficiently. And you can imagine most businesses have zero incentive to actually do any of this stuff. It's very difficult. And so, to round out in closing, I just wanted to mention about my, I guess, this newfound love of recorded work and recorded speaking, because I didn't really figure it out until now, and it's a shame, but I just always was too technical and in this case I would think like, oh, well, the mic built into the phone is no good. So I shouldn't use the microphone built into the phone because like it's not good enough and I have to get something better, but then it's too cumbersome and it took a while to get this system up and running. But what's amazing about recorded content is its permanence. It's permanent. And so it lasts. Whereas if I have a conversation with a human, it's very likely that the conversation is lost and it cannot be studied and that's very aggravating, and it almost makes it so now I don't even like talking to humans because humans are far inferior to just a recorded format. And so then the other additional thing is that since it's recorded, and in this case also transcribed into text, it can be easily pasted into GPT, who is more often than not just a superior version of what a human would even be able to do, because oftentimes when I talk to people, they have nothing to say. They don't really know what I'm talking about. I mean, they might have opinions. They might try to get into an argument with me. They're usually wrong. They're usually just being self-centered and opinionated, and they're just wrong, and they're just, I don't know. So the AI is a much more educational and conducive experience. And the final closing thought is people's technological noise and the secret advantage that I've been left alone by other people. Because most people are just noise, they're just humor, and they're just stupid anyway. And it's very difficult to like figure out how to navigate that, because me as a person is hungry for so much more, and I'm just not getting it, I guess. I'm not receiving the more that I need. And most people, the way they use technology and the way they interact with one another, it's lots of blind noise anyways. It's not really anything productive or anything that I would want. So while I love people's souls and I love the soul of a human, I don't know that I love the mind. I'm just addicted to the heart and the soul that resides in humans. But the flesh and the mind is a very weak and incompetent manifestation of our potential. And I hope that through Neuralink or other various technologies in communion with AI, we'll be able to liberate us, improve our memory, and improve our broad ability to converse and our linguistic skills, so more souls will be liberated at more of the level that I would be able to appreciate. Schla out.